Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're joined with futurist Barbara Marx Hubbard. Today we're going to be having an interesting discussion on conscious evolution. Our guest is known as a global ambassador for conscious change and the co-founding World Future Society and the Association for Global New Thought. Today we're going to be sharing thoughts about how social and planetary evolution will work, and through the foundation for conscious evolution is to awaken spiritual, social, and scientific potential of humanity. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Barbara Marx Hubbard. Barbara, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well.
Tell us how this started for you. I was reading some of what your past is and how you came to do this. It was very interesting.
Well, I was born in 1929 in the midst of a Jewish agnostic materialistic culture. And I was doing pretty well and fine until the United States dropped the atomic bomb on Japan. And that awoke me up because I was in this hopeful culture. It woke me up to the fact that if we continued to use this new power in self-centered consciousness, competing and fighting with each other, we would destroy life. And I didn't even see at that time all the other new capacities, atomic and nanotech and biotech and quantum computing, et cetera, et cetera. But I saw that humans were gaining the power of gods, and we didn't know what to do with it. We could destroy ourselves. So I started to search through literature and philosophy and religion to see what images of the future equal to our potential that were good did humanity have in this life, not life after death. And I saw there were none. Not one single one that I could find of a person equal to the power that was good, that could lead our civilization toward the good. There were great mystic giants of the past, a Buddha, a Jesus, and so on. There had been wonderful individuals that tried to correct problems, like Martin Luther King, Gandhi, even John F. Kennedy, but nobody that really represented the power of the emerging humanity. So I really got started on that search.
What specifically are we looking for when it comes to the evolution of consciousness, do you believe?
Well, that's a great question. I believe we are looking for awareness that our consciousness is the consciousness of evolution itself. In other words, the whole story of evolution, from the origin of creation to us, has been impelled by a universal intelligence of some sort. That intelligence is arising in us as our own consciousness, because its origin is consciousness. And my own view is that the universe itself is fundamentally a field of consciousness out of which life is emerging. And that we are the first form of life on this planet to be aware that we are evolution evolving, that we are an expression of the story of creation internalized. So my consciousness, just to speak personally, is the awareness that my personal desire to be, to grow, to do, to love, to express is the consciousness of the evolutionary process in myself activating me.
We live in a day and an age where there seems to be a lot of, call them spiritual leaders, if you will, or at least self-proclaimed gurus anyway, and consciousness seems to be that particular language they like to use quite a bit. How to become consciously aware of eating, how to become a conscious gardener, and it just goes on and on and on, and you start to think, it sounds great, or at least you believe it does, but what are you really talking about?
Well, consciousness, like you and I are on the phone right now, I'm conscious of you. And what am I really conscious of? Well, I'm not even seeing you, so obviously I'm not aware of that, but I feel a presence that's you. And that presence, when I really put my attention on it, has deep awareness. of all levels of reality that you're feeling right now, this moment, and we happen to be doing this in cyberspace, which we're not even aware of the magnificence of that. But what it really is doing is consciousness is expanding now to create a holistic connectivity through all of humanity. And all of this is actually happening. And so the more conscious you get, the more you're aware of what's happening within you and beyond you, and the more you can participate in it.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing, too, when you consider the fact that it's so alive. And, you know, we're not at a point, we're beyond the point of, say, 60, 80, 100 years ago where we were just talking, listening to what somebody else was saying, but we actually now understand, especially through scientific proof, the power of the words to actually shape consciousness itself. What are your thoughts on something like that?
Well, that's right. Now, just back up one moment before that question is, it was only in the 1960s that we learned cosmogenesis, that the universe itself is evolving. Mm-hmm. That it began in some mysterious flaring forth, which nobody fully understands that. But it has been, there is one seemingly tremendous drive in evolution is toward more conscious life. If you want to just take the sweep of the billions of years and see it as a spiral, you know, universe, earth, life, animal life, human life, and now us on the phone, just go like that.
Right.
What you see in an amazing sense of direction towards more conscious life. So the consciousness that we are now, I believe, is the consciousness of the process of creation that's creating us. I mean, I'm not just conscious of just this little, encapsulated human. I'm conscious, and I am an expression of all that. And I forgot what your question was. I got so enthusiastic.
Well, actually, it was a nice expression because what you were saying, or what I was saying in the question is this. Let's just go back a century. Uh-huh. Back then, we were in, I would kind of call it a linear way of thinking, and perhaps we can thank Newton for doing that. That's Sir Isaac Newton, that is, because he created at least a theory of a relatively linear universe. Here is gravity, we're bound by it.
Right.
So as a result, when you would talk to somebody, let's say a century ago, the feeling of I am me and you are you, there is that separateness. So when we had a conversation, that was an expression of who you were, your thoughts and feelings. Yet that was linear. That was the human experience there. Now,
exactly.
I hear clearly what you're saying, and this is what makes this such a dynamic conversation. Now, we jumpstart now 100 years, and by now Einstein's relative theory has really begun to sink in, and so we have a whole new way of looking at things into a more quantum field. It isn't so linear anymore. It becomes more 3 and 4 and 5-dimensional. Right. So when you say consciousness becomes alive, that you are an expression of that universal reality, so to speak, rather than that linear one, you begin to realize the responsibility that you have and the expression of that consciousness. Would that be a fair way to look at it?
Yes, absolutely. The expression of that consciousness, and you might say the intentionality of that consciousness to create more conscious life in me, in you, in everyone. And just another point here, as we're facing so many breakdowns and so much dreadful cruelty on this earth, it seems this crisis of breakdown and cruelty is awakening in so many millions of us the desire for greater love, greater unity, greater wholeness. And it's almost like the crisis of birth, where something is dying, some form of human consciousness, a separated self, has exaggerated itself to the point of destruction of life. Whereas loving self, consciousness towards more life, more creativity, more love, is also rising simultaneously. It's like that great march in Paris 2 days ago, with the leaders of the world linking arms with millions of people there, saying, "I am Charlie," on behalf of the freedom of speech, actually, and freedom of thought, and whatever we've gained to understand what democracy could really, really mean. And poor old President Obama having somehow missed being there.
Right.
For some mistake of his staff or whatever, and missing it, because it was an epic moment in the history of humanity. If you see all those world leaders who don't get along with each other at all, linking arms with 1 million people and all over the world, it was caused by the tragedy of the terrorists killing people who were expressing radical opinions, and the world joining together that no matter what those opinions were, we stand for freedom, we stand for oneness, we stand for caring for each other. We have to notice that and say humanity is also rising in its courage and love.
Barbara, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because it goes to a deeper reality, too, because as you were talking about the atrocities that you came to know as a young woman or even a child with, of course, the atomic bomb and World War II, is that you go back further into the history of humanity, and there was a time where it seemed, anyway, that maybe war was a little bit necessary as we tried to gain new ground as a tribe, to gain more natural resources, because as tribes get bigger, that's just what happens. And as anyone studies history, however, you see that each and every empire that rose fell. It just could no longer work anymore, and it could be, I remember interviewing with author Daniel Quinn, best-selling author of the book Ishmael. And we were talking about his book at the time called Beyond Civilization, and that's what one of the things he was talking about. You look at the Mayan Empire, this great empire, but all of a sudden it just seemed to disappear. The Roman Empire, the British Empire, it goes on and on and on. Every time there was an empire, it just seemed to dissolve. It just seemed to disappear somehow. Now, as a result, each and every one of those empires, for them to become that, had to go to war and conquer somebody, so therefore there was an enemy that perpetuated a set of beliefs for them to grow to that size.
Right.
Now we're in a day and age where the alleged cleverness of this unknown entity, so to speak, decides to say, well, since we're probably done with wars, why don't we just create this war on terror? And I think what you're talking about here is that we have gotten to a point we are really tired of whoever is behind the curtain pulling the strings and the levers, just like in The Wizard of Oz, and saying, there is no enemy known as the war on terror. This is something somebody out there is making it up. We're pissed off. We're tired of wars. Let's move forward. And I think that's what's really unfolding here. What are your thoughts on that?
I just totally agree with you that the idea of fighting terror with more war.
And trying to say that it's Muslims. I mean, come on. These guys are having a hard enough time as it is in the Middle East, trying to just have their own place to stay. So.
I know. See, every culture has had a radical friend. Think about what the Christians did.
And the Catholics as well.
Think about the Inquisition. Think about, my God.
Think about the Native Americans in America and what those
and
religious
killing all the Native Americans. And what I have noticed is that every culture at its worst has been violent. Even the Buddhists now are violent.
Right.
I mean,
that's a fact.
Yeah, I had hoped that they never would be, but they are in certain conditions. But at the same time, I believe it's true that more and more of us, I think it was started with Paul Ray's description of cultural creatives in the 90s, and then I have been saying cultural creatives are moving up into a type of human I'm calling Homo co-creator. Now, Homo co-creator is somebody in whom the creative impulse of conscious life is growing and yearns to join with others to create, and actually gets more satisfaction and love and positive results by joining than by fighting. Mm-hmm. And there's a whole group of people that are really trying to find out how to co-create. And we, in society, have been separated into silos, into cultures, into religions, into competing corporations, and so on. Even our great universities, everything is split into separate silos, and as you get a PhD, you have to be completely specified into a very narrow focus, or you can't get your PhD. Whereas I think the exact opposite is what's happening, is an overview of the whole system as a process of creation. And that's what for me, the evolutionary perspective of creation is the essential worldview to shift the world. You've got to stand outside of the whole, look at it as a process of meaningful impulse toward more love and more conscious life, and that's in you. And you start going with that force with everybody else who joins with you. That's what I'm doing in my book, Conscious Evolution, awakening the power of our social potential, the self-actualizing society. We can do this now.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you bring up PhDs in education. Now, there was a time when education seemed to have that kind of credibility that said when you went beyond high school and you went to college, you were learning to think, learning to express yourself.
Yes.
Somehow by the decade of the 1970s, that seemed to morph into what I would call a very ugly way of looking at what they call higher education, to the point where people who now go to college, it's nothing more than an expensive high school diploma, because they're basically parroting back what some instructor with little world experience has so they can get a good grade and eventually get that PhD. Now, I say this because as someone who's hosted radio for many, many years, I used to get excited when somebody would come along with a book and they were a PhD. I thought, here's somebody who's pretty smart, probably knows a lot more than I do, knows really how to use their mind. What I began to discover was just the opposite. These people, to me, I began to realize, and this is just an opinion, that they took a thesis that they must have gotten their PhD with, somehow added a few thousand words and created a book out of it. But there was no real thought behind that. No real expression. You couldn't deviate outside of the so-called 200-page curriculum they've created to really look at this and explore it in a way that you might come to new ideas and new expressions of those ideas.
Well, I think you're right. And see, it's a tragedy to me that all the brilliant young people of our country and the world in general are not understanding their part in the process of creating more conscious life. That they're not aware of the unique creativity in them. And here's a big lack also, along with this overspecification, is that not nurturing genuine vocation. It's not how can I go through college, get a job, which I probably won't get, and be in debt for my life, which is a terrible thing. But rather, there's a whole new movement to say you don't go to college really to find out what you're going to do in life. Maybe you can learn to think, and I'm not saying there's not very good teaching that is available, but really what's needed is you go into your soul, like I did. I went to Bryn Mawr College. I couldn't find it there because I had a unique vocational calling to discover my role in the evolution of humanity. Now, I couldn't find a single course on the evolution of humanity, much less my part in it.
That and Stephen Hawking can't be everywhere at once, although he does talk about that quite a bit.
So I decided what I think is true of most really creative people, including the people like the Steve Jobs of the world, is they don't get it from college. They get it from two or three more people joining together in some kind of exciting endeavor that's based on their passion to create, and if they're really smart, they become entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think freeing enterprise, not big enterprise, not huge corporate capitalism, but 2 or 3 or 10 people joining together because they have a passion to create, and they can generate resources by creating in a free society like we're in, is one of the great blessings. Like, I'm basically an entrepreneur, although I wouldn't have called myself that, because I'm a teacher, I'm a speaker, I'm a writer. I teach on the Shift Network on Internet. People take my courses, they pay for it. And I am able to earn, something by doing what I love to do. Mm-hmm. But it took me so many years, and I couldn't possibly have gotten this in college. I'm self-educated. I started on a track. I found Abraham Maslow. I found Teilhard de Chardin. I found Sri Aurobindo. I found Buckminster Fuller. I didn't find any of those. And it's still not easy to find this in any kind of ordinary university. Mm-hmm. There are a few, like California Institute of Integral Studies, certain things in JFK. There's some new centers that are attempting to do this, like Ubiquity. But it's way, way under the surface.
Mm-hmm. I was just thinking as you were talking about that evolution of yourself as this, many years ago as I found myself in the restaurant industry, it was something that I really enjoyed. I started, cooking. My mother raised me with that skill.
Oh, that's nice.
Well, she said it was funny. Her reason for that, and this is somebody who left high school at the age of 16 to have me, and I found her to be a lot smarter than a lot of other people who went to higher education. But anyway, that being said, it was funny the years that I spent there because of what I've learned. And this is kind of be my stab at higher education, and it isn't because I'm against it. I believe lifelong learning is not only necessary but nurturing.
Yes.
But the thing is I remember that as I moved from the back of what it's called the back of the house to the front of the house, this is where the people serve and host and all that. And I was serving a family one time, and their daughter, who was, I think, probably a sophomore in high school, was very interested in the culinary arts, and her goal was that she would love to go to a culinary school and that she would eventually like to open her own restaurant. Now, her parents were certainly adamant that she goes to college after high school. And I looked at her, I said, do you really want to do this? Do you want to be someone who, wants to become a chef and run your own restaurant? She says, it's a passion of mine. And I said, if I could make a suggestion to you, here's what I would suggest. Go find a place like a Denny's. Go there and become a cook there.
Yes.
And then as you want to grow your skills, go to different restaurants and do that. Then if you feel the need to close any gaps, go to a culinary school and kind of fill in those gaps.
Yes.
Because culinary schools today, you see it on the television, it's just like almost any other college. Get a career in the culinary institutes, join today, and these things are running $50, $60, $100,000 in some cases.
Yes.
So like college, what you're saying to me is something that you don't hear in the discussion is we are zapping our conscious evolution gene pool by having children buy into a system that their parents bought into, go to high school, get a good education, go to college, but now get into debt because most people aren't really able to afford to pay for their children to go. Now They got to go out into this world because this college this higher education gets them these so-called higher-paying jobs which aren't available, and now all of a sudden they're standing here almost bankrupt with all this knowledge but nowhere to really apply it.
Yes,
and I think it's robbing them of something very valuable.
It's a tragedy, and one of the things that really is also happening on Internet, you can get almost anything you need on Internet.
Right.
And not only like the teaching on the Shift Network, but free courses from some of the best teachers in the world. And what I would recommend Does that noise bother you in the background?
I hear a chainsaw, so I think that what we're hearing is a consciousness severance.
It is a
from the old
chainsaw.
way of
I'm sitting outside in the sun. I could go back in if it's bothering you.
No, it isn't bothering me at all. I'm sure our listeners will find it very entertaining. In fact, one of them is
I want you to know, if you can get the picture, I'm sitting in the sun on the terrace in Santa Barbara.
Very good.
The sun is so warm, and I don't want to leave it. Okay, so I forget what I was saying. Something about education. Let's just pick up the thread for me.
Yeah, and what had happened is that you said this day and age on the Internet, you can pretty much have access to anything. Yeah.
So what I would do if I were starting over, it's pretty much what I did because I self-educated, even though I went to a very good college and I graduated cum laude, but that was just because I was good at taking tests. But I think that what I would do is discover what attracts me to create. I would be talking to people. I would do, just like you said, if it's about cooking, I would go to a place where I can cook. If it's about writing, I would start trying to get a job at a magazine. I would do anything to begin to practice something I love to do. I try to find 2 or more people that I can discuss what I love with, because I find the ability to find resonance around your attraction to create is very, very stimulating, rather than people just telling you what they want you to do. Is for you to discover and share your passion. And it can be anything. Like, I have a granddaughter now, and she has ended up with the most interesting thing. She didn't like school, and she was fussing, and she lives with my daughter up in British Columbia. She has become a horse therapist.
Wow.
I mean, I never even heard of it. She loves horses. And there is a whole field of tradition of the healing that horses can be for people. So she and my daughter, she's got her little place next to my daughter who's building a home up there, is a whale researcher and a protector of wildlife. So little Cleo has a horse, and she's learning how to be a counselor and therapist with her horse. Now, there is a perfect example. That girl did not like school, but she loved horses. Mm-hmm. So she found a way, and her mother helped her, to make of that passion for horses a career, and she had to go to college to learn certain things.
Sure. See, and that made a lot of sense, didn't it?
It absolutely did, and she just sent me a picture of herself with her horse. Usually she sends me only a picture of the horse. I want to see you, Cleo, as well as the horse.
She decided she was worthy to be in the photograph with the horse finally. She had earned that degree.
She got somebody to take the picture of her hugging and kissing the horse. Mm-hmm. Holding its head in her arms with her face right next to the horse, and she's turning towards the camera smiling. Well, there is a girl who found what she loved to do. And she also can earn her living, or at least some of it, by doing that. So I recommend for everyone, first step, notice what attracts you. Reach out to others who attract you. Begin to experiment with what you want to create. Then go to whatever educational resources you need for that. Mm-hmm. And as you grow in it, as you grow in it, you can expand your learning. And since education is lifelong learning, instead of squeezing it all into that 3 or 4 years of college and then trying to get a job when you're in debt, I would expand education to lifelong learning and start out by yearning and exploring what attracts you, meeting people, reading the books of those who attract you. Then you start becoming a creator rather than a person who has a job to earn some money in order to finally get free to do something that you might want to do.
Mm-hmm. And it's so interesting what you're talking about because we live in a day and an age now. There's a friend of mine who is a spiritual intuitive, and in fact, she'll be on the program here very soon, and was talking about how the fourth and the fifth dimensions are beginning to open up. I know perhaps the average listener out there says, oh, there's that spiritual woo-woo fluff everybody's been promising, and I think probably that listener is sitting there as that student who listened to their parents, went to college, tried to get that job, perhaps did get a job, but still is trying to deal with the debt, scratching their head going, how come everybody else is living their dream and I somehow missed the boat?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the fact is, Barbara, what you're talking about, just so we can add some clarity here, is as you began, or I began, or, for instance, your granddaughter began that step toward the journey of self-discovery, we begin to look and experience our great natural inner power.
Right.
Okay? Now, back as I was talking about a century ago, we were linear. We began to think, well, I think, therefore I am.
Right.
There is the law of cause and effect, but we're in a time and an age now where it's beyond that, as I was talking about earlier. Now, here's the hidden power behind this, and I know this is really, to me, from what I've discovered about your work, the real backbone of what you're talking about here. When you can become consciously aware of yourself, you begin to grasp of the power that I think somehow the Bible was really trying to tell us. This is what it's really all about. If you can get this, the power that you have will be beyond measure. Does that make sense?
Yes. Absolutely. That's right. I totally agree with that.
Now, that being said, when you decide to finally live your bliss, you will have that power that life will just surrender itself to you.
Well, you see that you're on the same track I am, because your bliss is the consciousness of the universe in you. That's what it is.
And I loved when Alan Watts actually said that in a Zen meditation, that you are simply the universe consciously aware of itself, but expressing it in only the way that you can.
Yeah, see, this is what you might say is spirituality made real.
There you go.
And I would get rid of this word woo-woo. I'm insulted by it, actually. I'm insulted by people's ignorance. What's woo-woo is the evolution of the universe. I have people who are like sort of agnostic, left-brain, brilliant intellectuals. Mm-hmm. And they'll say, I don't really see any sign that anything is improving or anybody's getting any better. I only see it getting worse. So then I'll say, okay, I would like you to look back 100,000 years ago. Homo sapiens sapiens wasn't here. Then go back a few million years ago, the large animals were just beginning. Then go back 13.8 billion years ago, and there was no universe. What do you make of that, say I to this radical, intellectual, brilliant person?
Right.
And I said, you tell me, what created that, and how did that happen? Well, it wasn't God. Okay, it wasn't God, but what was it? Mm-hmm. So the word God is too limited a word for the awareness of the power of universal creativity. Mm-hmm. And it really, here's a point for you, maybe you can help me. I don't think there's a good word for the evolutionary expression of the divine. God in action, God in creation. Mm-hmm. This word spirit doesn't quite do it. God doesn't quite do it. Consciousness doesn't quite do it in and of itself. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I was just kind of grappling with it because, going back to earlier as I was talking about the fourth and the fifth dimensions, one of the most interesting conversations that we've been having here on the program with people, especially when we talk about conscious evolution as we are today, is that a lot of people seem to be experiencing the acceleration of time.
Yes.
Also, one of the other things, and even younger people, it's interesting, are saying, geez, I thought it was just me getting older, and that's just kind of the byproduct of getting older, is that time just seems faster.
Yes.
But you brought up an interesting point, too, about the Internet and how we have access to so much so immediately, and I had created an ideal or a theory that says, because at almost a push of a button or at our fingertips, we are able to have just about anything we want to now. We don't have to wait anymore. And there's that conscious evolution. Now, here's an even a bigger way to look at it. Remove all the technology, just push it to the side for, let's say, a day or a week.
Mm-hmm.
And say to yourself, what are your desires and what would you like to have? You would be astounded to see how immediate it presents itself.
Right.
And that's where, as I was talking about the fourth and fifth dimensions, physicists are talking about this. They're saying, we're beginning to evolve into that ethereal, I guess, what do we want to call that, quantum field where that happens.
Yes.
You don't have to wait around for somebody to say, that's okay for you to have that. Your desires manifest themselves now.
Well, let me give you a good explanation that I'm getting from the understanding of quantum physics. Is what the physicists are learning is that matter, as we see it, like this table or this body, is actually, on the subatomic level, is not matter, it's events. Mm-hmm. It's a continuous flow at the subatomic of particles that only come into being when observed.
Exactly.
Otherwise, they're sort of every here all the time, yet undifferentiated. So when I am in a meditative prayer now, what I do is I place my intention into the subatomic level, which is, this is like left brain. It's there. But it's not visible because it has turned itself into a 3D object. But underneath the 3D object, if you could see it under an electron microscope, you would see nothing but energetic frequencies. And those frequencies would not even take shape unless you observed them. So this is the power of prayer. This is the power of intentional healing, healing at a distance. This is the power of remote viewing. A lot of the things that were considered woo-woo. So we're getting rid of the word woo-woo. Nobody says that in my earshot anymore, because they don't even know how woo-woo they are when they're saying that, because they're denying the reality of the evolving universe. And stupid. Excuse me. I have a little passion on that.
Well, I love your passion, because here's what I'll say when all that's just woo-woo nonsense. What evidence do you have that what you're saying is true? But usually they stumble and trip up and go, well, okay.
You know what it is? It's a lack of experience of your own essential nature. That's what it is. Mm-hmm. It's simply a deadening of yourself.
Mm-hmm. I remember as I had a guest on the program, we were talking about miracles. And the fact is, as I mentioned earlier, I brought that if people kind of peered and looked at the Bible just a little bit differently, not the way your preacher in the local town is saying, this is what God said and what God meant, but if you really look at it and read some of it, that you would realize, it's an interesting metaphor in some ways that shows us how we can come to that level that we're talking about now, to know that it's not only available, but it's real and it's available anytime you want it. And one example is I began to kind of look at the works or the teachings of Jesus Christ. I said, okay, who is this guy here? And it's unfortunate now, and I say this just from my point of view, that it seems Christians focus so much on the sacrifice he made to alleviate our sins. Okay, so, well, you can easily say, well, what does that mean? But I say, let's just put that discussion aside for a minute and take a look. What was he talking about? And I remember there was a guy, as I had attended a Bible study of some sorts, and it was fascinating to listen to him talk about what Jesus was saying when it came to manifesting miracles or setting goals and making them real. He says the first place, Jesus says, this is the first step, is you've got to feel it in your heart. And then you have to express it by saying it. And that is really what a miracle becomes. It's through the heart, and then you say it so it becomes real. Just like what you're talking about with quantum evolution is, it becomes real when you shape it by just sheerly looking at it. There is no difference between that and that sort of teaching of what Jesus is saying. You speak it to make it become real. And when he was sharing that, I thought, why aren't they talking about this when they talk about Christ? Because I want to tell you fascinating.
I'd like to tell you something. And along with my book, Conscious Evolution, I'm coming out at Easter with an amazing book about Jesus. It's called The Evolutionary Testament, The Promise Will Be Kept. And it's an evolutionary perspective on the Gospels, Acts, and Epistles, in which I'm experiencing Jesus as a future human.
There you go. And I'd be interested in having that book and having you back on the show, because I think that would be a great conversation for this program and for our listeners.
I want you to remember that, because I'm going to also initiate evolutionary Bible study groups. And I'm going to suggest a practice that you sit together with 2 or more people, you read a passage of Scripture, you put yourself into a sacred space, and then you can read a few of my inspirations from Scripture, and then you have your own. Right. So you start to cultivate what I'm calling the inner Scripture of each person. Because everyone has internally, inner knowing, that's so fleeting sometimes that you don't even notice you have it. But I'm a journal writer, and I've kept for 187 volumes of journals since I was 18 years old. I'm 85 now. That has given me an inner listening. And I tell you, the inner essence of one's own being, one's own unique self, knows everything that you need to know about you or know where to get it. I mean, it's so profoundly wise, but you've got to pay attention and create an incorruptible communication system with your own inner Scripture, your own inner revelation, intuition, understanding, and words.
I think that we're approaching, too, an interesting paradox when you take a look at the millennials. And what I find a little troubling is sometimes the, observation of who these millennials are. They look at them as people that are non-traditionalists. They're kind of lazy, as sometimes that I hear the expression of them. They kind of want to do their own thing. And I say, well, why don't you step back and take a look at the fact that maybe what you're seeing is a jump start toward a different kind of leadership. That you're trying to impose an old worldview that didn't work too well when it was active in its height, and you're trying to say they should live the same way, and it just didn't work. Right. And as a result, I was just watching a fascinating documentary. I think it was something called Generation Like. And when you take a look at, for instance, just the world of advertising used to be an old world school of people who had a lot of experience on how to tell you what it is you needed and wanted and how they seem to have that for you. And now the younger children are actually recreating and redefining what all that looks like to actually serve needs.
Yes, exactly. Well, I feel, here's another amazing thing about saying yes to that consciousness within you, the spirit within you, that seeing yourself as an expression of the universe evolving, which you are. then you start turning on to more creativity and more life inside yourself. Mm-hmm. And like I'm feeling amazingly at 85 that I'm getting newer rather than getting older. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean I'm getting younger, because I wouldn't want to be younger. I would want to be ever fuller of what I truly am, but what you truly are, as it unfolds, has newness in it, you know? It has creativity in it. And I just want to say to anybody over 50, particularly women over 50, that as you begin to fully express whatever your passion to create is, whatever your life purpose is, it's more than just a project. It's a love affair with your gift, wanting to give it, because when you give it, you feel joy. That will regenerate you and heal you of a lot of problems. Mm-hmm. A lot of problems come from depression, from feeling isolated and separated. I have felt it myself. When I get out of awareness of this inner impulse and out of the sort of the process of sharing it intimately with others, I actually lose my life force. Mm-hmm. And as you get older, that's true, because you don't have the 20-year-old body, but you have something more. You have more consciousness, more freedom, and more wisdom in you if you say yes to it. So I'm very, very excited about offering that to people in my new course. I want you to, is this a live show?
Very live, yes.
Okay, so I want people to go to evolve.org and see my new course called Sacred Journey of the Conscious Evolutionary. Because everything that I'm saying on this call is something that you will experience by taking this course. Evolve.org. That's www.evolve.org. You'll find all of this there. And I am going to be, it's a long course. It's 5 months, but you need to take time for this. This is not a quick fix. This is a lifelong commitment to yourself to become who you fully are. So I'm very excited about it and feel blessed to be alive.
Mm-hmm. Barbara, I love what you're talking about as you say that, here you are in your 80s and you're feeling more alive more than ever before.
Yes.
And here's the exciting part about that, because one of the reasons we started this program was to break down the old paradigm of what aging is. I think aging used to be looked at from an industrial world standpoint,
right,
which made sense. After all, when you're 80, you can't be very fast on an automotive assembly line.
Right.
Not like somebody in their 20s, okay?
Right.
So it stands to reason you retire people by the time they're 60 years old, and 65, whatever it is, because they just can't function in a manufacturing capacity to the same level as somebody much younger. That just makes sense. But we don't live in a world like that anymore. Now, to give you an idea, something that I feel is being overlooked in the news is this space shuttle. And here are these people that are out there in space. Now, here's the fascinating thing is it's also the first time a 3D printer has been taken into space. Now, we're going to be talking about this evolution of technology with this 3D printing, because this is fascinating stuff. And to give you an idea, you're familiar with 3D printing, I'm sure.
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Yes.
So here's what they were talking about. I got to see this as they were simulcasting the astronauts from the space shuttle, and they started talking about this 3D printer they took with them.
Yes.
They said it's quite a fascinating device. One of the things that one of the astronauts made was a ratchet, just something that they could simply use.
Yes.
And the fact that you could use this 3D printer with almost zero waste.
Mm-hmm.
They're building houses in China that you're able to 3D print a home with almost zero waste. Now let's think about this for a minute. We have moved to a time where you're able to build a house with almost zero waste, and outside of the input to the 3D printer, almost no manpower. that sure gives us a heck of a lot of time for this introspection that you're talking about what's the next step into the fourth and the fifth dimension. So you guys with the woo-woo attitudes, go back to manufacturing cars in the Ford factory. We're moving on. This train's moving.
This woo-woo is so silly, actually. The closer you get to the woo-woo people, the more you realize they don't know what's going on.
But the whole idea that we're at that point now, and that getting older, and the fact is now you're bringing wisdom to the table of co-creativity, and now you have that ability to do it. So we're back where the ancients were thousands of years ago, where the elders are now being respected.
Yes.
And the youth is actually looking toward that.
Yes, it is really true. Yes, well, I think we're all in for a big ride in the next 5 years of life. Because while systems are breaking down, they're breaking through everywhere, and you might as well get on the breakthrough journey instead of on the breakdown journey, don't you think?
I agree.
I mean, so you have a choice. And this is another thing I mean by conscious evolution, is evolution by choice, not chance. And that's a really big deal. That is radically new. Evolution by choice, not chance. It's never happened before.
Barbara, now you're bringing up something that's pretty wild in and of itself. Apparently in Japan, the youngsters are deciding really not to have children.
Yeah.
Okay? So they're having what's called cyber sex, apparently just to get that urge out of the way, whatever all that is. But the fact is, they're realizing it's almost difficult this day and age to bring children into the world. I mean, think about what we were talking about earlier. You got this huge pool of people coming out of college but no jobs, so how do you make the money to be able to raise children? That's a lot of responsibility.
Yes.
Now, you have something, and I'm kind of curious for you to elaborate on this, supra-sex. Okay, now that's different from biological sex. But talk about what that is and why that's part of what we're talking about here when it comes to the future of human consciousness.
Well, supra-sex is actually, as in sex, you're joining genes to have a baby. In supra-sex, you're joining genius. Let's say, like you and I right now, as we are discussing what both of us are interested in, it's the very beginning of supra-sex. I don't say we've gone the whole way with it, but you are bringing forth out of me a certain part of my own creativity. I'm bringing that out of you. If this were to become a really long friendship, we would discover supra-sex because you would be joining your genius with my genius, and it would be more than the sum of our parts. And it would be unique to this particular configuration of joining. And it's fun. It's life-giving. It gives you joy. And that joy is an absolutely essential quality of sexuality. Suprasexuality is the pleasure of joining genius.
And the G-spot takes a heck of a lot longer to discover, doesn't it?
So we can call it the genius spot.
Exactly.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that. Hey, that's good.
I'll let you have that one.
Oh, I have not thought about that. Thank you. I'm going to have to go because it's 10 o'clock and I have another appointment.
Understood. I know time does run. See, there it is, that accelerated time we were talking about. I know we were close to the top of the hour there. But before you go ahead and give out a website that our listeners can find out more. And I'd certainly like to revisit this again, especially when you come out with that Testament book that you were talking about.
Oh, I'm very excited about that. Yes, I want you to do that, please.
Absolutely.
And it's www.evolve.org.
Evolve.org is the website that you can find out more. Barbara, thank you so much for having this conversation with us and our listeners here on the Beyond 50 radio program. What a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there. There you go. So it's your responsibility to step in because, as I said before, the train is moving along, and you've got to decide whether you want to be on board with it. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.